Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. Today we become reacquainted with a St. Louis novelist who writes a different kind of mystery story. Elsa Hart's now written a third novel, which takes place in early 18th century China. They all feature a bureaucrat librarian named Li Du. He has a knack for cracking hard cases. Elsa has a knack for creating wonderful word pictures of ancient China. Her earlier novels are titled Jade Dragon Mountain and The White Mirror. The latest is City of Ink. Elsa Hart, welcome back. Nice to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I love your books.
Thank you.
I have to say that. I spent the entire weekend reading the most recent one, and that was a great way to spend a snowy weekend.
Oh, wonderful.
You know, your book, the latest one, is City of Ink, is set in 1711 in Beijing.
Yes.
How in the world do you research the society of that time in St. Louis?
Well, I am lucky to have wonderful resources in St. Louis for doing research, for doing book research, including the St. Louis Public Library, and the Missouri Botanical Garden has a wonderful library, and the library at the St. Louis Art Museum had a lot of really great books. But I was also very lucky to be able to go to Beijing and do some research there, just walking the streets and trying to get to know create in my mind the setting where this book was going to take place.
How much information is there in St. Louis about 18th century China?
Well, one of the main resources I used was a big book, and I sat in the library in the St. Louis Art Museum it's called Peking Temples and City Life, and it sort of maps out Beijing of that period based on specifically the temples that were there. So it's very architecture focused, and that became kind of a theme of the novel. So I do craft the story a little bit based on what I'm able to access research-wise. So the two happen, they coincide.
Your plots are quite intricate. You remind me somewhat of John le Carré in that you really have to pay close attention to just keep with it, but then everything is explained very, very beautifully as the plot goes on. What is your process like? I mean, the ideas, where do they come from, and what's your writing process?
Well, thank you so much for the compliment. I'm a huge fan of John le Carré, and very, very early in the process when I was starting to write Jade Dragon Mountain, and it was my first time writing fiction, I would read scenes from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and I did something that I think I heard Ray Bradbury did as well, where I would just retype the scenes to try to get the sense of the rhythm, and specifically I was trying to learn tricks. I really enjoy the way John le Carré is able to go into characters' heads and then move out of them again very, very fluidly, and I was trying to learn how he did that. But my process is I'm a very, very strict outliner. I need to have the skeleton of the story down before I make any attempt at writing a beautiful sentence. And I sort of assumed that was the case for all writers of mysteries, but I've since spoken to many, including Donna Leone, who writes the Inspector Brunetti mysteries, I think, set in Venice. And she can start a mystery not even quite knowing who done it and figure it out as she goes. And my response was, you must be amazing at chess, because that is I really need to have everything figured out.
Tell our audience about Li Du. How did he come to you?
So Li Du, this librarian, came to me. I can sort of identify the moment. I was in China, and I was there because of my husband's research. He's a biologist, and he was studying rhododendrons high in the mountains of southwest China. And on these mountains, you can see these old paths that kind of contour the sides of the valleys, and they are part of the what is called the Tea Horse Road, which was a trade route between China and Tibet. And as I was walking these paths, it was very, very misty, and the mist would kind of come into the gorges almost like a snake, and then rise up and obscure your view. So you'd be on one steep slope looking across at another steep slope, and these kind of windows would open in the mist. And it felt almost like you were seeing across time. And I kept thinking there was going to be, I would see someone there, and this idea of this traveling scholar came to me. And then research-wise, he was very much inspired by a scholar named Xu Shake, who was actually a traveler during that time, and he wrote very extensive journals of his travels. So he became very much a model for Li Du.
We probably ought to give some sense to our audience of what the story is about, without too much detail, because we want folks to read the book. But just give us the Cliff Notes version of City of Ink.
Of City of Ink. So City of Ink is the third book in what has become a trilogy. In Jade Dragon Mountain, we meet Li Du, and he's an exile. By the end of Jade Dragon Mountain, he is no longer in exile, but for reasons of his own, he's not yet ready to go home. But by the end of The White Mirror, the situation has changed, and he has, in his mind, no choice but to return to Beijing, return to his home, where he's avoided for many years at this point. So he comes to Beijing in City of Ink in order to investigate the death of his mentor, who was supposedly executed for being a traitor, but now Li Du has new information. But of course, his investigation of this crime of the past is interrupted by murder in the present, and he is drawn into a double murder that has taken place at the black tile factory, and has to kind of choose between focusing on that and possibly compromising this investigation into the past that has been his obsession.
Okay, folks, if you want to know more, you've got to read the book. It is a fascinating tale, but most fascinating to me, I think, is the pictures you paint of what life was like in Beijing at that time. You mentioned the tile factory, for instance. What we're talking about are roof tiles. You know, that's not something that would immediately come to my mind if I were working out a plot. What was life like in Beijing in 1711?
Well, one thing that surprised me in my research is, I went into it with this idea that Beijing sort of was the Forbidden City, that the Forbidden City was where everything was happening. And I didn't realize that the Forbidden City, while it was the heart of Beijing and the seat of the emperor's power, there was this thriving city outside the walls of the Forbidden City, but within the walls of Beijing, and one that was going through a lot of change, because we have this new dynasty, the Qing dynasty, that is still, barely one generation in, and it's an invading dynasty, the Manchu horsemen who came from the north and displaced the Chinese aristocracy of Beijing. So all of these Manchu horsemen had moved into the beautiful Chinese mansions around the inner city, and the Chinese aristocracy who had been there before was moved down to the kind of muddy, sloshy outer city, and was trying to deal with that humiliation to some extent, but also create a new thriving cultural centers there. So there was just a lot happening. It was busy.
Inner city and outer city, and walls. One of the things, God knows we hear enough about walls these days in our current society, but everything seemed to be walled in.
Yes, it was an incredibly controlled city physically, that you had the wall surrounding the Forbidden City and then the wall surrounding Beijing. But then within Beijing, there was a wall separating the inner city from the outer city, and then lots and lots of smaller and smaller walls dividing neighborhoods. And all of these walls had doors and checkpoints, so any sort of movement was extremely monitored by soldiers and a strong military presence. And people were really expected not to move after dark, that by the time it was dark, the doors close, the city shuts down, and you stay wherever you were when the sun set. Was
that because they were concerned about the potential for insurrection, perhaps?
Yes, exactly. This emperor, still very new into the reign of his dynasty, really didn't want there to be places for public gatherings or a way for people to move quickly within the city in an uncontrolled way.
How did the emperors of the time rule?
Well, they ruled in cooperation with a very large government. So you have the emperor, issuing edicts and working from within the Forbidden City. But then the Manchu, when they came in, they really adopted much of the bureaucracy that had been there before, that had already existed in China. So you had ministries that were taking care of everything from public safety to making sure trash was cleaned up in the city and building walls and administering to the huge number of provinces and lands and peoples outside the city in the farthest corners of the empire.
It seemed that everything went through the emperor, though. He
Yes.
decided, and it was always a he, decided everything.
Yes.
That must have been difficult for him and also difficult for the population. If you crossed the emperor, you were in big trouble.
Yes, and in theory and in the kind of narrative of leadership, yes, everything went across. Every murder trial was checked by the emperor before, and in practice, whether that was actually the case, but that was, probably not. But the idea and the feeling of rule was that the emperor really was the father of this family, and that he saw everything.
A constant backdrop to the overall story here is the examinations. That is where thousands of people would come into the town for the purpose of taking these exams. Tell us what they were all about.
So the civil examinations were basically what you had. They were men only, male scholars taking them. What you had to pass in order to get any sort of job in government. So, and once you had that meant security and prestige. I mean, that was the top. That's what you wanted. So every 3 years, after a rigorous process of smaller examinations within the provinces, the sort of cream of the crop, the top test scores, would come to Beijing and sit for these grueling examinations. And it was this time of celebration and anxiety and stress and thousands of candidates pouring into the city with these fluttering banners that announced that they were examination candidates. And alcohol was flowing, and it was a crazy time.
Well, they spent a lot of time studying, but as you indicated, there was times when that just became too much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a tense time in the city, which for me was advantageous for thinking of mystery dynamics, because people had a lot of on their mind and were sort of ready to act unwisely.
Well, once again, we can point out that this plays an integral part in your story, but we'll leave it at that. I'm talking with Elsa Hart, who is the author of City of Ink, her third novel in the Li Du detective series. I guess we can call him a detective. He's actually a librarian, but he does a lot of detective work on the side, if you will. We'll come back and continue our conversation in just a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Thank you for listening to this St. Louis on the Air podcast supported by University College at Washington University, with undergraduate and graduate programs part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Back to our conversation with Elsa Hart. Let's go back to 1711 and learn a little bit more about the people, Elsa. You're very descriptive in what they ate and also in how they dressed. Give us some sense of that.
Well, one thing that I particularly enjoyed learning in my research was that there, as we do today in this kind of urban center of Beijing, people were really excited about food coming in from the provinces, and there was very much the finding the trendy place to go, or the new kind of hot, spicy something that was coming in that everybody who wanted to be seen and be in on the conversation would be visiting. So I tried to incorporate that description into the stories, and it helped that my sort of sidekick for my detective, Hamza, loves to eat. So he ends up being the one who is always present for those food descriptions, I think. And
you make much of the garb that they wore, robes being something that would differentiate the classes and different types of occupations.
Yes, that there, and particularly for Li Du in this book, where he is confronting the fact that he is coming home but isn't the same person he was when he was there before. And he was this imperial librarian who had these formal dress robes that he would have been required to wear whenever he was in the Forbidden City or in the presence of the emperor, that he hasn't worn for a really long time, and he's had them packed away. So I've been trying to distinguish between these more humble clothes and then what it means for him to be considering returning to that.
Were they differentiated by color?
I can't. Yes, there were color, and then I think there was also the headgear was important, and the formal hats would be topped with various jewels or gold or silver. That was also an indication of where you ranked kind of in the bureaucracy.
You spent 3 years in China with your husband, as you had indicated, and much of that time or all of it in Beijing?
Actually, so we spent pretty much all of that time basically as far from Beijing as you can get and still be in China, in the city of Lijiang, which is in Yunnan province in far southwest China, which is where we were because he was studying the rhododendrons on Jade Dragon Snow Mountain, which is what ended up inspiring the title of the first book.
Well, if you got that far away from the center, has life changed a whole lot in the very rural areas from that which you're describing?
Yes and no. I mean, there is something, I think, unchanging to mountains and to this area of natural beauty and people who have been living within these very unique environments for a long time. There are certainly sort of consistencies of traditions and lifestyles, but certainly there have also been huge changes. And the place where we were living, Lijiang, even though it is extremely remote, is one of the most popular domestic tourism locations in China. So there were tour buses streaming in every day to bring people to see the city, which ended up also kind of contributing to my inspiration for the story because of this idea of people streaming in to witness this spectacle.
And what can you see in Beijing today that would be helpful in your research from 300 years ago?
It's a good question because not very much. Compared to other cities, Beijing's history is not nearly as visible in its architecture and its streets as might have made it easier. But I was able to do something really fun actually, which is there's a map that was commissioned by the Qianlong Emperor, who was a little bit after my time, but just a couple years, and he commissioned a map of the city. And that map still exists, and it's incredibly detailed. And I was able to overlay that map sort of as a transparency over a contemporary Google map and then walk the city as I wanted to lead you to be walking. So I could measure the distances, even though I wasn't seeing anything. I could, feel at least how far it would be and look out for anything that was the same. So even if it was a lake that was in the same place or a little bit of the old city wall.
It sounds like very meticulous research. Did you make any of this stuff up, or was it all the product of research?
Oh yes, I made a lot up, and I think in the end, I really am so much more a storyteller than I am a historian, and my focus is on the mystery and is on these fictional characters, and I enjoy the research, but I use it for inspiration and then really take off into imagination. So other than the character of the Kangxi, the emperor himself, all of the characters in the book are fictional, and maybe a few of the Jesuits who are mentioned were also there.
I was just going to get to that because in all of your book, the Jesuits come into play at one point or another. What were they doing there?
So they were there ostensibly to convert, to missionize, but they were the only Westerners who were allowed in China at that time, which is what drew my attention to them. They were advisors to the emperor, mostly scientific and technological advisors. They were building astronomical instruments that would help him make predictions about eclipses and things like that. So he found them quite useful for that. And yes, they were the envy of other Westerners because no one else could figure out a way to persuade the emperor to let them in. But the Jesuits, starting with one named Matteo Ricci, who had written letters to the emperor for 20 years begging for an audience, and finally received one by offering to build a clock for the emperor and show the mechanisms of building a clock. So that's how they won their place. And were there and had been there for a while, but at the time my books are set, their influence was starting to waver. So they were in a bit of a precarious position.
Did you have any difficulty initially pitching the story idea for Jade Dragon Mountain to potential publishers?
Well, not. I mean, it's a hard process, but not difficulty really. I mean, I had finished the manuscript completely before I approached literary agents at all. So I had the complete story and was able to do my best to describe how it could be enjoyed and what audience it could find. And then it was just a matter of finding the right literary agent who felt that she connected with the story and would know how to then describe it to publishers. So it was a scary process, but it went pretty well.
But the storyline is different enough that I would think that it would, raise some eyebrows. People say this is different and this is pretty good.
There aren't a lot of historical mysteries set. It's not a common setting yet for them. So, which is, I hope there will be more. But
But there's not going to be a Ledoux in your next book.
Yes, I'm temporarily, or for now at least, I have concluded Lidou's adventures and am writing a fourth book that will be set in the same time period, but with a new detective duo.
You just tired of Ledoux? After a while, I would think maybe you would.
Not tired, definitely no. I mean, one always hears that Agatha Christie didn't actually care for Poirot that much and felt kind of stuck with him. And I definitely don't feel that way about Ledoux. He's been such a dear companion. I kind of, when I'm stressed out, I picture him sitting next to me and helping me out with this next one. So it's definitely not tired, but just for now, having a sense of him having found some closure, I think, and being able to let him go off and have his own adventures in the realm of imagination without my help for a little bit, I think.
Right. And you say you spend 9 hours a day writing.
I try.
That's a lot. I mean, most authors that I've talked to spend a couple of hours. Many of them just get up in the morning and then go on with the rest of their day.
I feel so privileged to be able to write full time that I just want to take advantage of being able to do it, and I enjoy doing it. I mean, there are different tasks involved in the writing process, so I'm not sitting and clicking at my computer during all those hours. There's lots of reading and book research and going for walks and thinking about things while staring at trees in Tower Grove Park, and so it's a varied process, but I do try to treat it like a full-time job.
When you do read other authors, whom do you like to read?
Well, when I'm deep into writing, most of my reading is research writing, or I'm writing authors that I admire, like John le Carré or Agatha Christie, or a very comforting old favorite are the Brother Cadfael mysteries by Ellis Peters that I will always return to. And I'm also a fan of fantasy and science fiction, so Terry Pratchett books are my go-to for a relaxing evening read as well.
You seem to be focusing an awful lot on murder and mystery, and here you are, just a quiet young lady dreaming of murder, I think, a good deal of the time.
Yes, one might not have expected it, but my murders are relatively gentle murders in the scheme of things. I do like the Agatha Christie style of not upsetting or taking my stories into too dire or bleak a place. They're sort of happy murders.
There's a shade of Agatha Christie in your latest book, and I won't say why, except that one of the murders, I think, is somewhat like one of Agatha Christie's stories.
Yeah, she is a major influence for me. And when we were talking earlier about getting started writing, when I was on the mountain, unable to sleep because of the high altitude, I was listening to the BBC radio adaptations of the Agatha Christie mysteries, which I just love listening to. So she is deep into my writing, definitely.
What about the prospects for movie or television, or working with Netflix or somebody like that for these stories?
It would be such a delight to see that happen.
Anything like that in the works?
I think there have been some, inquiries and things. I love that, when you having a literary agent, one of the most important conversations you have early on in that relationship is, whether whether the author is going to be involved, every time there's a little nibble at something like that, or whether the author prefers to just, type unless they have to make an immediate decision. And I'm very much the latter. So Stephanie, who's wonderful, lets me know when there's anything urgent. But other than that, she kind of handles things. But it would be really exciting to see that happen. And of course, you do sort of fantasy casting in your head.
Oh, sure. Well, who would play Ledoux?
I don't know. But
yeah, that would be fun to think of. One of our producers wanted me to ask you about pacing. Very impressed by the pacing. How do you work that? How do you know how to keep it moving to the point that the reader is not going to put the book down?
It's difficult, and that's something that has so much to do with recognizing what a process writing a book is, that you go through so many revisions and so many drafts. And I think pacing it has a lot to do with having a structure and knowing where you want to get by the end, but it's also something that I think happens late in the process. When you've got everything down, you've got a draft of the book, and then you go in and really try to say, is this a moment when the energy should be high, and instead of being high, it's flagging? And if it's flagging, why is it doing that? Am I describing things too much, or am I not using tense enough words to describe things? Pacing, I think, can be so helped by realizing that, the sun setting can be a comforting, beautiful set of colors or an ominous, worrisome set of colors, and how you shade that really affects whether you're drawn into the next scene in a tense way or whether you fall asleep, which might also be nice.
I always make it a point to read the acknowledgments in books because it tells me a lot about the author in many ways. And I notice you, as many authors do, most probably, acknowledge the help you get from people who do exactly that sort of thing for you. Say you need a little more of this here or that there.
Yes. My editor at Minotaur, Kelly Ragland, has been wonderful at giving that kind of feedback. When she reads the final manuscript, a lot of what she focuses on is pacing, and is saying, here's a chapter when the reader should feel like they're being cranked and wound into an even tighter place, and instead it feels a little relaxed. But then, I kind of say, well, can you fix it for me? And instead, of course, then I have to actually do it. But that kind of editing help is really essential.
It's not as easy as some people might think. Even
not.
For excellent and gifted writers, they always could use a little bit of help.
Definitely.
Husband help?
Oh my gosh, so much. My husband and my mother as well are my other two top editors and advisors.
Well, I'm going to thank you so much for being here, and once again recommend City of Ink. I enjoyed it as I did the other two books, and I can't wait for your next one. I don't care whether Ledoux's in it or not. I enjoy your writing so much. It's very, very descriptive and very, very nicely done.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear.
Elsa Hart, thank you. Once again, the author of City of Ink. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.